My name is Sediko. I have conducted a research on conflicts between host communities and mining houses in Bojanala District, South Africa. The research or the dissertation was submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Masters of Arts in Conflict Transformation and Management in the Faculty of Humanities, the Department of History and Political Studies at the Nelson Mandela University. My supervisor was Prof. Nsigelo Breakfast. I just first want to appreciate him for the support that he gave it to me during this process. And I just want to first appreciate the participants who gave their time and availed themselves to participate in these studies and gave me information freely. This study aims to gain an in-depth understanding of the causes of conflict between the mining host communities and mining houses, with specific reference to Bojanala District, which is in Northwest South Africa. The study was limited to Bojanala Platinum District Municipality, and therefore, the findings will be contextually limited to Bojanala Platinum District Municipality. However, I just want to raise that one. However, the findings of this study might be important to identify the critical causes of conflicts between the host communities and the mining houses in South Africa. The theoretical framework of this study is the human needs theory. And in addition, the study uses the frustration aggression theory, the relative deprivation theory, and the Marxist theory to explore and describe the phenomenon under the discussion. My presentation will take a shape of, first I'll give you an introductory background, the motivation for the study, the research aim, questions, and objectives. I'll also give a high level of the methodological framework and research design that I've used. I'll cover the ethical measures and considerations that I've taken into consideration. And I'll take time giving you the findings and analysis, and then the recommendations and the conclusions. Colleagues, the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck in 1652 marked the beginning of the white supremacy and land dispossession in South Africa. That arrival and the marking of the white supremacy and land dispossession in South Africa was consolidated through the enactment of the Native Land Act of 1913. The dispossession of land from Black South Africans through this colonial and apartheid native land included the land rich in mineral resources. So the land dispossession of 1913. Just a minute. Just a minute.
Sorry, Rakolote. Amo, can you help us, my brother, to just mute yourself? We can hear what you are saying.
No,
so
thanks.
There is a yes.
Thank you so much. I'm saying the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck in 1652 marked the beginning of the white supremacy and land dispossession in South Africa. And this was consolidated through the Native Land Act of 1913. The dispossession of this land through the colonial and this apartheid law of 1913 included the land rich in minerals. And the inequalities of this The legacy of this Native Land Act includes the current high level of poverty, inequality, and unemployment that continues to haunt the Black communities in South Africa. The dispossession of the land also robbed the Black majority of an opportunity to mine the mineral resources on their land and consequently improve their socio-economic conditions. Blacks were removed from this land rich with minerals, and that robbed them the opportunity to mine the mineral resources from those land and improve their own socio-economic conditions. In 1955, the Congress of the People sat in Kliptown in Johannesburg and adopted a Freedom Charter. One of the clauses in the Freedom Charter talks about people sharing the country's wealth, and this includes the mineral wealth beneath the soil. The Freedom Charter called for the distribution of all the mineral wealth beneath the soil to the people of South Africa as a whole, not to individuals. The post-1994 government or dispensation ushered in a new era of legislation in terms of governing the mining sector. And the aim of those legislation was to promote equitable access to the country's mineral wealth. I'll argue that the post-1994 dispensation, the legislation, was more influenced also by the Freedom Charter of 1955 that talks about the distribution of all the mineral wealth beneath the soil to the people of South Africa as a whole, not just individual. Some of the legislations that were enacted post-1994 includes what we call the Mineral and Petroleum Development Act, commonly known as the MPRDA of 2002. This act empowers the state through the Minister of Minerals, Resources and Energy to serve as a custodian of the minerals of South Africa on behalf of all South Africans. So this act empowers the minister to be the custodian of the minerals on behalf of all South Africans, not just the few, or not just those who have got minerals around their community. The minerals belongs to all South Africans. And the custodian becomes the state through Department of Minerals and Energy, and the minister becomes the custodian. Section 100 of the MPRDA, or the Mineral Resource Development Act, empowers the minister to develop what we can call as broad-based socio-economic empowerment charter for the mining and mineral industry, which is called the Mineral Charter, to serve as a regulatory instrument. So the post-1994 government enacted some laws to transform the mining sector. One could also argue that the contribution of the mineral sector to South African economy is very significant. If you look at the slide that I'm sharing now from the Mineral Council of South Africa, the 2021 report, it states that the mining contributed over 480 billion to the country's GDP in 2021. That is about 8.7% to the GDP of the country. In the same report, if you look closely, you will realize that mining in around 2021 employed over about 450,000 employees. And the mining employees paid over 27 billion to pay SUN in 2021. and contributed over 15.4 billion to VAT. The mining sector as a whole also paid about 78 billion to corporate income tax. And over and above that, paid around 27 billion of royalties. So I will argue that the contribution of the mineral sector in South Africa is very much significant. The mining charter policy, which is the mining charter 2018, places the host communities. These are the communities where the mining is taking place. Places the host communities at the center of mining development and requires the mining houses to contribute to the socio-economic development of these communities. The mining charter is not saying focus only on these communities, but it places these communities at the center of development and requires the mining houses to contribute to the socio-economic development of these communities. I want to draw your attention to section 25 of the mining charter policy. And I'll explain why I'm saying a policy, not legislation. Because that decision was taken by the court that a mining charter is not the law, it's just policy. I want to draw your attention to section 25 of the mining charter, which raises the importance that the mining houses should consult with relevant municipalities and traditional authorities when they formulate and implement community development projects. This policy framework, called the mining charter, raises the importance that the mining houses, when they develop projects, they must consult with relevant municipalities, which are the host municipalities where they are operating, and also with traditional authorities where they are operating. Colleagues will know that municipalities are the local sphere of government as stipulated in section 151 of the Constitution. And the objectives of the local government are also well captured in section 152 of the Constitution of the country. Also, colleagues will be aware that the traditional authorities are recognized in chapter 12 of our Constitution. And also, their objectives are well captured in the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act of 2003. So these two institutions, with the traditional authority and the municipality, which the mines must engage with when they develop and implement community development projects, find their establishment within the Constitution of the Republic. These two institutions are very key for the mining houses when they formulate and implement community projects. But colleagues, I want to caution and also raise the following. These very same two institutions, which are the key stakeholders in consultation with the mining houses to formulate and implement community development projects, are also marked by internal instabilities and conflicts. For example, in 2020-2021, Municipal Finance Management Act report, the Auditor General of South Africa states that most of South African municipalities exhibit political and administrative leadership instability. This is the report from the AG, where the AG says most municipalities in South Africa, they've got internal instabilities. There is political and administrative leadership instabilities. And there is municipal councils, poor oversight. These municipalities have got financial health problems, and they continuously, there is service delivery protest because of poor performance of political, representative, and administrative staff in these municipalities. So This key institution that the mine must engage with has got its own internal challenges. And one of those challenges is political and administrative instability. Secondly, one scholar called Mbo in 2021 article raised that even the traditional authorities have got their own internal conflicts. And these internal conflicts within traditional authorities, they contribute towards the instability and social unrest within communities. And traditional authorities are also challenged to mediate conflicts within communities. So municipalities have got their own internal challenges. Traditional authorities have got their own internal challenges. And these institutions are very key in terms of the engagements by the mines in developing and implementing socio-economic development projects within communities. I'm still giving you the introductory background of my study. One other thing that I want to raise around my introduction is that racial and gender employment inequalities still exist in the mining sector. Within the mines, even though they're doing very well on issues of contributing to the GDP and paying over 28 or 29 billion rand of royalties in 2021, there's still racial and gender employment inequalities within the mining sector. If you look at the Commission for Employment Equity Annual Report, 2020-2021, it indicates that the top management of mining sector in South Africa still white dominated at 57%, of which out of this 57%, 50.1% are males. I want to argue that the dominance of white males within the mining sector entrenches the white supremacy and patriarchy in this sector. And the other thing that I want to argue on is that the top management of the mining sector, because here the report states that 57% of them are white and 50% of them are males. So the top echelon of the management structure in the South African mining, which is white and male, lacks the lived experiences of Black communities in South Africa. But also the current racial and gender employment inequalities in the mining sector are not a new phenomenon. It's not something new. This can be traced back pre-1994, when the government of that time had a legislation which was called Mine Works Act of 1911. The Mine Works Act of 1911 effectively was disqualifying Blacks from owning mines or occupying positions as skilled laborers within the mine. So then the current structures within the mining can be traced back far before 1994. From this 1911 Act, which was disqualifying Blacks from owning mines or even occupying positions or skilled laborers in the mines. So that is an introductory background of my study. What is the motivation of this study? Both the MPRDA that I've explained as an act that empowers the minister to serve as the custodian, and even the Mining Charter 3 policy indicate that mining houses must consult with the municipality and traditional authorities before implementing community projects. In the process of developing these projects and even the implementation, there must be a consultation. But despite these legislative frameworks and policies that prescribes engagement protocols, there is evidence of conflicts between host communities and mining companies. There's evidence which has been comprehensively documented by Brown and Stelkis and Buckley around issues of conflicts in the mining sector. But it's also evidence documented by South African Human Rights Commission Annual Report 2016. This report of South African Human Rights Commission states that the mining operations are marked by conflicts. And although they create jobs and contribute to the GDP of the country, conflicts often erupt between the host communities and the mining houses. One scholar called Galvano, in the article of 2008, argues that the relationship between the mining houses and mining communities remains a battleground. So there's always a conflict between mines and mining communities. Despite all these legislative frameworks, there's always a conflict. And also, Jenkins, in the article of 2004, believes that the mining industry has always demonstrated a devil-may-care attitude towards mining host communities. So Jeskin argues that the mining industry is always having this devil-may-care attitude towards mining communities. And the conflicts between communities and the mines are becoming a permanent feature of mining communities in South Africa. So based on this, I then decided to explore the causes of conflicts between host communities and mining houses in South Africa, particularly in the Northwest Province. And that has been the motivation of my study. I will then take you through the research aim, questions, and objective. The aim of this study was to generate a thorough understanding of these causes of conflicts between the host communities and the mining houses. If we've got this industry that contributes to our GDP and contributes significantly, but is marked by conflicts between them and the host communities, one has to understand what are the causes of these conflicts. Therefore, the aim of this study was just to generate a thorough understanding of the causes of these conflicts that contributes to the constant tension between these two parties. And when I'm saying these two parties, I mean the mining communities, or what we call the host communities and the mining houses. The primary research question for my study was, what causes the conflicts between the host communities and the mining houses in the Bojanala Platinum District in Northwest? And the objective of the study was just first to identify the causes of these conflicts, two, to explore the conflict management approaches that are developed and implemented by the mining houses, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, the local municipalities, and the traditional authorities to transform and manage these conflicts. What are the conflict management approaches that are used by all these stakeholders that I've just mentioned to transform and manage these conflicts? And the third objective was to make recommendation on how to transform and manage these conflicts in mining communities. The methodological framework that I followed for this research, this study is a descriptive research. Fox and Bayard indicate that a descriptive research aims to expose the recent problems. And in this case, the recent problem is the conflict between the host communities and the mining houses. So the descriptive research is to expose the recent problems through a process of data collection and to describe the situation more completely. I took a decision to use this descriptive research so that I can expose these recent problems and use the data that I'm going to collect to describe the situation more completely. I use the qualitative research method as an ideal method for me to obtain an in-depth understanding of the causes of these conflicts. In terms of participants, I've used a purposive sampling strategy. My first target was to have 55 participants, and unfortunately, only 32 participants participated in this study. In terms of the approach of collecting data, I've used focus group discussions, elite interviews, and documentary reviews to collect this data. In terms of the data analysis, I use the coding process to assemble the collected data and to make a meaning out of this data. So this is in summary, the methodological framework and research design that I followed. Before conducting any research, or when you're conducting a research, there are some ethical measures and considerations that one has to look at. What I did is that I applied for the ethical clearance certificate from the university, which is Nelson Mandela University, and I was granted this certificate on the 4th of November 2021. After receiving that certificate, I sent a letter to participants, including this ethical clearance certificate. Before they agreed to participate, I sent them a letter requesting them to participate and also attaching this ethical clearance certificate. In the letter that I wrote to participants, I've indicated that some of the things that I've indicated is that participation was voluntarily, and they've got the right to withdraw from the study at any given time without even giving me reasons. I've indicated to them that the study will be conducted with honesty, integrity, and objectivity. And I've also indicated to them that their names will be withheld and not to be disclosed to any third party. So in my dissertation, I don't mention the names of these participants. So participants, after receiving the letter and my ethical clearance, they then signed a consent form and sent it back to me. And I then arranged the focus group discussions and the elite interviews. These are ethical measures and considerations that I followed when conducting this research. Now I move to the findings and analysis. First, I'll deal with the demographics of the participants and provide analysis there before I go to the content analysis. I've indicated that my target was to have 55 participants, but at the end, I did not reach that number. Of the targeted 55, 23 declined to participate without providing any reasons. So out of 55, 23 declined. But out of all that participated, in terms of the demographics, on the gender issue, there were 43% of males and 57% of, there was 43% of females and 57% of males in terms of gender. 57% of males and 43% of females. In terms of their racial profile, there were 93 Black Africans and 7% of coloreds. In terms of their age profile, 57% of these participants were between the age of 36 and 49. 9% of these participants were over the age of 50, and 34% of these participants were below the age of 35. In terms of their academic profile, 44% of these participants were below grade 12 in terms of their academic profile. 31% of them were having grade 12. 16% were having postgrad and undergraduate qualification, and 9% of them had postgrad. In terms of their economic profile, 50% of these participants were unemployed, 34% employed, and 16% self-employed. If you look at all these demographics, you'll realize that 50% of participants of this study are unemployed, and around 44% did not have grade 12 qualifications. One could argue that the high levels of unemployment have a direct link with high level of poverty and inequalities in society. And also this also involves even in mining communities. The most participants in this study who are unemployed also do not even have grade 12 qualifications, which limits them to contest for work in the mines that stipulates grade 12 as a minimum requirement. So these participants who don't have grade 12 and are unemployed, they have got some limitations in the mines in case the mine says, we want to employ people who have got the minimum of grade 12. So these ones already are disqualified. But also, another argument is that the primary need of the unemployed in the mine host community is the employment for them to address their basic needs. If you look at the basic needs theory, indicates about people have got the basic needs. One is shelter and food, and those needs, if they are not met, they are likely to become frustrated and aggressive. So if you look at the human needs theory and the frustration aggression theory, indicates that when people cannot have their basic needs be met, they are likely to be frustrated and be aggressive. And when there's aggression, it will lead to conflicts. So these are the analysis of the demographics of my participants. I'll then quickly move to the content analysis because we don't have a luxury of time. These were the findings regarding the central question of my study, which was, what are the causes of these conflicts? The first finding was that the causes of the conflicts between the mining houses and mining communities is unfulfilled promises by the mines. One participant in a focus group interview remarked that, let me quote, when the mine was prospecting and consulting communities for development of their social and labor plan, the mine promised the communities jobs and business opportunities. And when it is time to employ, the mine wants people with skills and does not consider local communities who are not skilled, close quote. This is one of the remarks from one participant. The other participant says, the mines are to be blamed. They overpromise and underdeliver. When they approach us as communities, they entice us with jobs and business opportunities. When it is time for them to deliver, they talk about business challenges. These are the remarks that comes from some of the participants in this study. So based on this, I found that mines makes promises that they end up not fulfilling. So the unfulfilled promises by the mines are the causes of conflicts between mining communities and mining houses. The second finding was that mines reward anarchists from communities. And let me quote one participant who said, open quote, "When you are loud and can lead protest against the mine, they will silence you with a job or a tender. It has happened and it is still happening now," close quote. The other participant said, open quote, "Mostly the leaders of community strikes against the mine end up being the ones getting job opportunities and business opportunities. So those at the forefront of the revolution are rewarded. The next leaders of the revolution will emerge and lead," close quote. The other participant said, open quote, "The mines are scared of bad publicity. We know that. If you close their operations, the mines will quickly call you to a meeting and give you something to stop the strike. The mine management does not want investors to know about the stoppage of the mine operations." So most of the participants mentioned that the mine rewards the leaders of the community protests. One could argue that rewarding the ringleaders of the protest will benefit only the lead protagonists and might cause further conflicts between the mining communities and the mines. So if you reward a leader of the march, tomorrow there'll be another leader that expect to be rewarded. So one of the causes of the conflicts between the mines and mining communities is the rewarding of anarchists from the communities. Because the findings here say the mines attempt to silence communities by rewarding the ringleaders with jobs and business opportunities. And this is not sustainable. Because if you reward these leaders, the following day there'll be others who are leading a march and expecting to be rewarded, or who are leading the stoppages and expect to be rewarded. And this now fuels conflicts between the mines and the mine communities. The third finding was community land dispossession by the mines. One participant said, I quote, "This is the land of our forefathers. Some of the graves of our forefathers are still in that yard of the mine, and we are not benefiting anything." The other participant said, I quote, "Landowners are paid peanuts as surface rental after their land was dispossessed by the mine. When these mining companies came to South Africa, our forefathers were staying on this land and grazing their cattle here. They removed them and took over the land with its minerals. Now we are beggars in our own country." The other participant said, I quote, "The mines are operating in our land. We are not even given jobs or business opportunities. People from Gauteng, Limpopo, and as far as Eastern Cape are the ones employed and doing business with the mines in our own land." So most of the participants remarked that the mines dispossess their lands without considering the host communities in terms of jobs and business opportunities. The ownership of minerals falls under the custodianship of the government. And the land ownership is mostly in private hands. So the minerals, the ownership of the minerals here, the custodian is the state through the Department of Minerals or through the Minister of Minerals. But when coming to the land ownership mostly falls under private hands. So as stated in section 1.2 of this study, in my introduction, the land dispossession, which was consolidated through the Native Land Act of 1913, has created high levels of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And this continues to haunt Black communities in South Africa. And this includes also mine communities. So the issue of land dispossession, there's a link between the minerals and the land. So where there's a contestation about land ownership, there'll be a conflict between that community and the mine. The fourth finding was on the nepotism, fraud, and corruption of mine officials, municipal officials, and traditional authorities. One participant said, I quote, "If you want to work at the mine, either you must pay or have sex with someone in the mine. There's a lot of corruption and the whole management is rotten. They sell jobs and business opportunities. I do not have money to pay Jojo, which is a bribe, and I cannot give someone sex to be employed. We will disrupt the operations until they employ us also." The other participant said, I quote, "They sell jobs and business opportunities. Municipal officials and the chiefs are given money to defend the mines. The mines hire only those who have relatives in the mine or at the municipality, or they are part of the Moshate, which is the traditional authority." The other participant said, they want 5,000 to give you a job. They have friends at the municipalities who collect the money on their behalf and give them a list of the people to hire. One gets the impression from these participants that the mine community, the mine host communities are really despondent and see no point of approaching the mine and asking for jobs except stopping the operations through protest. This participant argues strongly that there is no way that you can be hired at the mine without paying a bribe. It appears that the high level of unemployment, poverty, and inequalities in mining host communities also exacerbate the abuse of power by mine officials, municipal officials, and traditional authorities. This report of job seekers that are expected to pay bribe or offer sex to be appointed is a clear indication of abuse of power and greed by those in authority. But also, these behaviors of expecting sex for jobs or sex for business contributes toward the gender-based violence in the country. These sexual predators who use the promise of employment undermine the dignity and the rights of the job seekers. So if you're expected to give sex for you to get a job or to get a business, the one who's doing that undermines the dignity, your dignity and your right as a job seeker. The other finding was that the Black economic empowerment policies are not benefiting the host communities. One participant said, as a community, we do not have shares in the mine. That mine is in our land. We have got nothing. The shareholders are politicians and whites playing golf in London now, whilst we are still inhaling the dust from the mine and our houses cracking from the blast every day. This participant indicated that as host communities, they don't have shares in the mine, even though the mine is on their land. And the participant said the shareholders are politicians and whites playing golf in London now, while the host communities are inhaling dust from the mine and their houses cracking from the blast happening every day. The other participant said, who are the BE shareholders in this mine? No one from this community. There is no one. The mine is right in our community, but has no shareholders from us. The other participant said, the BE shareholders in the mine are staying in Sandton, not in this community. And some of them are politicians and their families. So participants sharply raised their discontent of not having host communities owning shares in the mine. They raised their objections that non-host community members have shares in these mines. They argue that the BE policies does not benefit the mine host communities. The other finding was that there is an exclusive community engagement of the mine. One participant indicated that the mine chooses people who are sweet and cannot challenge the mine to engage on behalf of communities. They buy them with catering during meetings. The other participant indicated that the mines must stop engaging only few people and engage the whole community. We are all part of this community, not only the ward councillor and the chief. They must engage all of us in a public meeting, not only few in the boardroom. The other participant said, I quote, only those who are friends of the ward councillors are invited to the meetings with the mine. They hire transport for them and take them to hotels for meetings. Why can't they have a meeting here in the community and all of us attend? These participants pointed out that there is no effective, inclusive, and impactful engagement platform that exists between the mines and the host communities. And also it indicates that there's no proper feedback mechanism that is in place between community members and the mines. And also there's lack of proper, and this lack of proper feedback agitates the host communities, and they resort to protest to disrupt the mines' operations. And this is an attempt to seek audience with the mines. So there is no inclusive engagement according to participants, and this fuels conflicts between the mines and the host communities. The last finding was that there is misunderstanding or lack of knowledge of legislations and policies that are governing the mine. One participant said, the mines are supposed to pay royalties to us as communities. Who's receiving that money? We do not know. Someone in the mine is eating our money with some politicians. They must give us our royalties. And colleagues, in terms of the law, the mines are paying royalties to government. And in this case, they pay royalties to SARS. And that is being paid annually. In my opening, I've indicated to you that according to the Mineral Council's report of 2021, the mines have paid around 27 billion rand of royalties to SARS. So there are community members who believe that the mines must pay royalties to communities, while the law says royalties are paid to government. The other participant said the municipalities are supposed to approve the social and labor plans of the mines. How are they approving without consulting communities? Who gave the municipalities the mandate? Close quote. So this participant said the municipalities are supposed to approve the social labor plans of the mines. There is no law that requires municipalities to approve the social labor plans of the mine. If you look at the MPRDA, if you look at regulations from the MPRDA, if you look even at the mining charter policy, there's no way where it says the approval of the SLPs are done by the municipalities. The mining charter policy says there must be consultation in the development and the implementation of the these community development projects that are finding expression in the social labor plan. There is nowhere where the law says municipalities have got the powers to approve or not approve a social labor plan. The other participant said, the law says the mines are supposed to give local businesses in our community 30% of our procurement, but they give that to people from Joburg. Close quote. So this participant is saying there is a law which says local businesses must be given 30% of procurement from the mine, by the mines. But they give that to people from Joburg. When looking at the law, I could not find anywhere where the law says local businesses within the mine or host communities must be given 30% of procurement. There's no law that compels the mines to give 30% of the procurement to businesses from host communities. There's no such law that I found. Maybe someone can assist me with that law. The other one, participant says, the mines are not complying, and the DMRE, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, is keeping quiet. It is the law that they must hire 70% from our community, as the mine is here in our community. Now they bring people from Gauteng, Limpopo, Eastern Cape, and even Lesotho, whilst we are here and not working. That must stop, close quote. So this participant says, there is a law which says the mine must hire 70% from the host community. Generally, participants misunderstand or lack knowledge of the legislation and policies governing the mine. No law requires the mine to pay royalties to the host communities. Like I said, royalties are paid to the state through South African Revenue Services, SARS. The state uses part of these royalties to provide public goods and services to the whole country. When the mining industry pays royalties to SARS, SARS takes that money and give it to Treasury. Treasury allocate that money through to departments and to municipalities across the country for these departments to provide public goods and services to citizens. It is not only for the host communities. The other thing is that there's no law that empowers municipalities to approve the social and labor plans. The regulator of the mines is the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, not the municipalities. So the approval of projects, even though the mine has to engage with traditional authorities and also municipalities, the institution that regulates the mine is the Department of Minerals, Resources and Energy. And this is the institution that is responsible to approve the social labor plan. Also, the mine host communities, there's no law that gives the mine host communities exclusive right for procurement or employment opportunities in the mines. The state is the custodian of the mine, of the minerals. But the minerals belongs to all South Africans, and that's the law. The law says so. So these findings of, this misunderstanding of the law also fuels conflicts between the mines and communities. Now I'll go to my last part of my presentation, which is the recommendations. I'm still doing the findings. One objective was to identify the approaches that are being used by mining houses, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, traditional authorities and municipalities in managing and transforming these conflicts. The mining houses, in terms of the approach, they're using what I can call avoiding approach. In avoiding approach, it means there's no engagement, or the engagement is very limited. So when they are managing and dealing with these conflicts, there's a limited engagement, there's no full engagement. So mines generally are avoiding engaging hostile stakeholders. In terms of the DMRE, which is the Department of Minerals, their approach in managing these conflicts is collaborating approach. They emphasize that both parties must have a win-win outcome. They're encouraging the mines to continue engaging with their host community. So they are using the collaborating approach. Traditional authorities, they are using a competing approach. This approach emphasizes that there must be a winner and a loser. There's always a competition between traditional authorities and the municipalities in terms of powers around the mines. Who has got more powers in terms of dictating on what should the mine do within communities? There's always that competing approach between the mines, between the traditional authorities and the municipalities. Coming to the end, in terms of the recommendations. The recommendations are informed by the findings. So I'll go to each and every finding and propose my recommendation. And then we can go for discussions. Implementation of the mines. I recommend that the mines must implement their commitments that they made to communities. The mines should consider having annual commitment registers that are published on the mine websites, and copies should be shared with all community-based stakeholders. If there's a commitment that the mine has made to communities, there must be a commitment register that has been published on the mine website, and this register must be shared with all community-based stakeholders. And also the other thing is that the entire senior management of the mine and the executive committee of the mines, the executives and the senior management of the mines must ensure the full implementation of these commitments. And this should form part of their key performance indicators. When someone is employed at the mine, one of his key or her key performance indicators is to ensure that there's full implementation of the commitments between the mine and communities. The other recommendation on this is that there must be monthly update reports on these commitments. And these reports must be shared on the mine websites, and also copies must be shared with community-based stakeholders. And where there's non-implementation of the commitments due to other reasons, this must be communicated on time. The Department of Minerals, the local municipalities and traditional authorities should consider having quarterly meetings to assess commitments that are made by the mine, that were made by the mines to these communities. So there must be a form of the tripartite engagement. The DMRE, the traditional authorities, the host municipality should consider having quarterly meetings to assess commitments by the mines to these host communities. And the mines should consider also presenting their audited annual integrated reports to mining host communities. And I will argue that presenting these integrated reports to these key stakeholders might empower these communities or these stakeholders to have an in-depth understanding of the mining business. So the mines present their reports and finances to shareholders on annual basis and reports to shareholders. My recommendation is that a simplified version of those reports must also be presented to mine stakeholders. And this will empower these mine stakeholders to have an understanding of the mining business. Secondly, I recommend that, but one of the recommendations is that there must be an inclusive, effective, and impactful mine community engagement forums. And in this case, the DMRE, or the department as a regulator, and the municipalities as the custodian of socio-economic development in local government, as per section 152 of the Constitution, and the traditional authorities as empowered by the Traditional Leadership and Governance Act, should consider developing a framework that guides the establishment of mine community engagement forum. Each and every mine has got its own way of establishing these forums. So my recommendation is that the regulator, which is the Department of Minerals, the municipalities, which are empowered by section 152 of the 1C of the Constitution as custodians of social economic development. The traditional authorities empowered by Traditional Leadership and Governance Act should consider coming together and develop a framework that will guide establishment of inclusive mine community engagement forums. I'm also of the view that the mine community engagement forum must be government-led, as it is the responsibility of government to drive the socio-economic development of communities. This should be in collaboration with traditional authorities where there are mining communities under traditional jurisdiction. My argument is based that my argument of having government leading this is that government is the one that leads investment in the country. It is the government that goes out and say, encourage people to come and invest in the country. So therefore, the government must create a conducive environment for these businesses, in particular the mines, as investors, to operate and manage communities. The citizen elects the government to drive socio-economic development. So government itself goes and encourages people to come and invest. Therefore, government must create conducive environment for investors to operate. Therefore, I'm of the view that community engagement forums must be government-led, and this must be done in collaboration with traditional authorities where there are mining communities under traditional authorities. And when I'm saying it must be government-led, it can be through the DMRE, the traditional authority, and also municipalities as tripartite arrangement leading these engagements, instead of each and every mine having its own form of forums and of engagement. The business of mine is mining. Government has got the responsibility to drive socio-economic development, particularly local government. Section 1521C of the Constitution is very clear. Also, in terms of traditional authorities, the Traditional Leadership and Framework, Governance Framework Act is very clear. So they have to consider developing a framework that guides establishment of mine community engagement forums. The process to nominate those who must serve in this forum must be fair and transparent. It should not be because someone is affiliated to a particular political party or someone is got a royal blood. It should be based on merit. And the process must be fair and transparent. While this is being led by government, those who are going to participate as some representative, the process to nominate them must be fair and transparent. The nominees must have legal and moral obligation to act in the best interest of the communities. One of the findings was that the mines reward those who are anarchists. So people will organize protests, stop a mine, and they know that the mine will respond by hiring that person. So those who are going to be part of representing communities, they must have legal and moral obligation to act in the best interest of the community. But furthermore, they must be jointly and severely liable for poor performance and maladministration that might occur in the engagement forum during their respective periods of office. The guidelines of nominating this representative should stipulate the necessary qualifications, skills, expertise, and in-depth knowledge for one to qualify as a nominee to serve in that forum. If this forum is about discussing socio-economic development of communities, you will need someone with necessary expertise and skills and knowledge to serve in that forum. You don't have to have a person because this person is more louder than this one, this person is more radical than this one, but it should be about people with necessary skills, qualification, expertise. And these people must have the legal and moral obligation to act in the best interest of the communities. Additionally, these nominees should not be unrehabilitated insolvent or a person who was previously convicted of any offense involving dishonesty, fraud, corruption, domestic violence, sexual violence, or gender-based violence, or has been sentenced to imprisonment without the option of fine or disqualified in law to hold the office of a director. These are other criteria that must be considered for one to serve in these structures. And also the nominees must disclose their actual or potential or perceived conflict of interest. You can't have people who are serving in these structures being at the forefront of also looking for jobs or business opportunities in the mine. They must declare their conflict of interest. And that is the recommendation. On the recommendations on addressing these conflicts, the other recommendation is that the mines must cease from practices of awarding incentives to silence the leaders or organizers of protest. South Africa is a constitutional democracy. As a country, we're governed by the Constitution. So protesting is part and parcel of participatory democracy. And communities have got the right to protest against the mining houses, and their rights to protest is linked to freedom of expression and freedom of association. So these are the rights that are linked to political rights, which are in the Constitution. But Section 36 of the Constitution is very explicit on the limitations of rights. The mine have the right to protect their assets, staff and contractors against any form of violent protest and business disruption. So the recommendation is that in a situation where it appears that the rights of the communities and or the mines were infringed, the law must take its course without fear or favor and without prejudice. Any award offered to silence the organizers or leaders of community protests deserves a strong condemnation from law-abiding citizens, because this also fuels conflict. The more you reward those who are leading this protest and leaving others, it fuels conflict. People must be rewarded based on merits and being qualifying, not on the basis of leading protests. So people have got the right to protest, and the mines must respect that. And those who are protesting also must respect that the mines have got the right to protect their assets and staff and contractors. So in a situation whereby there's an evidence that the rights of the communities or the mines were infringed, let the law take its course. The other recommendation is that as a country—
The last one, Mr. Rapulot.
Yes, I'm wrapping up. Thank you so much. The other recommendation is about we must address the land question in South Africa. The minerals are linked to the land question. As long as we don't address the land question, the issue of conflict between the mine houses and the mining communities will continue. The last one, we must consider reviewing the MPRDA and mining charter policy of the country. Thank you so much for your—
Yeah, thank you very much. That was insightful. That was very profound. And then just to summarize in 3 minutes, I would like to say that with this particular presentation, I think you reflected on the history of South Africa, which was the history of colonialism first and apartheid second, because you reflected on the causes of inequalities, unemployment, and poverty as located within patriarchy, racism, of which capitalism is the superstructure. So you were very clear about the aims and the objectives of your inquiry, which was to interrogate critically the causes of conflict between mining communities and the mines. And then we also had you talking about a breakdown of your target the profile of your target audience, which was arguably representative because you took into account issues of class, socioeconomic status, as well as gender. And also your theoretical orientation, you brought in a very interesting theory, frustration aggression theory. When people are frustrated by the conditions that they're exposed to, they tend to be aggressive. When people are aggressive, it means they are predisposed to become involved in conflict. And the key findings, very important, you reflected that they are very organizational related, but they are also system related. So in order to understand the causes of conflict between mining communities, I am reminded of the tale of 3 people and blind people to underscore the necessity of using a multi-level approach to deal with the burden of the conflict as a complex phenomenon. There were 3 blind people who became blind before they could see the elephant. They were requested to describe the elephant using their hands and by also feeling its texture and shape. The first person who stood at the head and felt its task described it as a horn. The second person who was behind the elephant felt the tail and thereupon described it as hard and bristly. The third person on the side of legs described it as something like a tree trunk. This inquiry, given the fact that you are saying there are many factors that are systematic, is crucial because we can learn from this inquiry that people who cannot identify the cause of a situation end up discussing the parts of the problem as the problem itself. We don't need siloed approaches. We need interventions that are holistic, inclusive, and integrated to ensure that we deal with conflict as the phenomenon, which is very complex. Thank you very much. And then Dr. Ntsikelelo, because the study is located within the security, peace, and conflict resolution paradigm, if you can, in 2 minutes, can you briefly expose to us what are the approaches that should be mainstreamed in the interventions that are intended to address issues of conflict in the society in general and conflict in the mines in particular? Before we can take questions.
Yes, I didn't see that one coming because our arrangement was that Tate Sediko was going to speak on behalf of himself, and then I will come in later on. Yeah, so
go on is fine. Go on.
No, I think he covered everything. We worked side by side. I think the gaps that I have identified, we will try to bridge them at PhD level, because we'll be working side by side at PhD level. And I might say this, that we have accepted him to enroll for a doctoral study. But I've got nothing to say in relation to his wonderful presentation. I don't want to throw cold water into it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much. And then just to remind people, he is the head of the Center for Security, Peace, and Conflict Resolution, as well as the head of Department for History and Political Studies. He has written extensively on a number of issues across the political spectrum. So without wasting time, ladies and gentlemen, can we take hands for comments and questions, if there are any?
Mr. Goman.
Yes, sir.
I'll request that before we take questions,
yes,
and comments, we allow a professor to present about the center. Then we can then take questions after that.
All right, Prof. In 1 minute, 60 seconds. What is the center all about?
It can be.
I'm putting you on the spot. I'm sorry for that.
You want me to answer your question in a few well-chosen words only in 1 minute? Hey, but no, that is practical.
He's joking.
Oh, you're kidding me. Okay. Yeah, because I've prepared a short a presentation, so I don't know if you can display it.
Yeah, let me try to get it here. Just a minute. I don't know how to. I've also, Prof, made you the co-host. Then you can share it from your side if I'm struggling from this side.
Eish, I'm a victim of apartheid now. You see, I'm not technologically advanced.
No, let's do like this. Let's continue with the questions then while I'm searching for this presentation.
Yeah, I think that's a workable solution.
Yeah.
Colleagues, can we take questions? I'm struggling to see who is raising their hand. Please, if you're raising your hand, I think you should go ahead, make an input. Anybody with comments, any question? I've seen so many comments that were written on the chat box as well. Perhaps we can just amplify them.
Komani, let me respond to a question on the chat box by Gilbert Moela.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
He states that the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act 5 of 2000 and Mining Charter stipulates bias towards host communities. First, I want to put it to you, Mr. Moela, that the triple PFA, Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, is an act that works in government. Therefore, the mines as private sectors are not forced to use that act. Secondly, the mining charter is not the law. There is a court finding on that it is not the law, it's just a policy. Therefore, there's no policy. And even if it was a policy, I mean, even if it was a law, there is no section of the mining charter that states that there must be biasness towards host communities when coming to businesses. The mining charter talks about preferential procurement on women, Black-owned, business-owned and controlled businesses and youth, but it does not say host communities. Because those who wrote it understood that in the MPRDA talks about the minerals belonging to all South Africans and the custodian being the state becoming the custodian. Therefore, the benefit from these minerals is not exclusive to host communities. There is no such law that compels the mines to have an exclusive form of procurement to host communities. I still have to find that law. But if you quote triple PFA, which is an act that stipulates how government has to do its procurement, that is not extended into the private sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Akulude. Prof, are you ready to share your slide?
No, I'm assisting him on this slide. Let's take other questions.
All right, let me take Eliseo. Eliseo, you are holding the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, colleagues, for such a comprehensive presentation, honestly. And I think we still have a long way to go as communities and industry, mining industry and other stakeholders at large. So for me, it's just an addition really to say that, one of the other reasons for conflict between communities and mining houses is because of lack of long-term planning. Because of when you look at our IDPs, where mining houses needs to go for identification of projects, is that they are not long-term driven. They're sort of, they are linked a political term. And that really honestly doesn't serve communities, or we don't really respond to the needs of the communities. And even the 5-year plan of the SLP, life of SLP, is quite limiting. If we can only see SLP 5-year plan as a review, after 5-year plan, it's sort of a review space, a review time, then you check whether to say, are your project or programs that are part of the current SLP, are they still resonating with the communities? So it should be looked at as a after the 5-year period, of course, should be a review time, for that particular mining house, and the host community. So there are so many things that are quite limiting, and that fuels that conflict between communities and mining houses. And mining houses are seen as though that they are not doing enough. And then it's because of the plans are not quite long term, and they are not, from the municipality's point of view, that I don't think they are resolute, honestly, and they're not intentional. Okay, let me just end there. That's my.
Thank you. Yeah, you remind me of a certain friend of mine. He says life of politicians are within a short cycle of 5 years, but that needs not to affect the interventions that are intended to address socio-economic challenges within the communities. So that is a valid point as well. Sabelo. Sabelo, go ahead. It's your turn. Sabelo, we're struggling to hear you. Okay, let me, while he's sorting himself out, let me go to Deborah. Deborah?
Greetings, esteemed colleagues. My apologies. I am possibly the last person to join in, which was already after
Right.
7.
Okay, no problem.
Yes, so I have briefly listened to the closing part of the presentation by Dr. Breakfast, and my concern, and it minuses the work of government, actually, just the mining houses themselves. Beyond mining, do we ever get to hear the mining houses agreeing to come to party beyond the lifespan of the mine? We don't hear them come to party, because they throw back the responsibility to us communities. They will say to us, we have come, we developed, you benefited from the SLPs, and therefore the rest is for you to do. So let's assume we all agree that the rest is for us to do. What then do we do? And that's where I see the largest gap, especially on mining that is happening in host communities, study traditional leaders. There is a huge gap there of training that is required, especially on the Mahosi side, because oftentimes the attitude is, I am chief, it's my birthright, it's everything else, but devoid of education, no knowledge, no expertise, nothing. We must admit the truth that we are dealing with hustler chiefs, especially in mining communities. We've got these hustler chiefs who, some of them are commonly known to be instigators of protests, of violence, and because they stand to benefit in one or the other, And so we must now ask ourselves, or as communities, isn't it time that we also became champions of our socioeconomic development? And while the mines are still active, what is it that we can do to start beneficiation, to benefit us as host communities? We can't always want to rely on solutions from government, because I think we need to meet each other somewhere in the middle, us as communities and the mines, including government. You know, unfortunately, I'm mindful that we don't have that many structured voices coming out of communities. And Dr. Breakfast is correct to say that, you know, let the mining community forums start having people who really understand the reason they are there. You know, you have a legal and moral obligation to serve in this, because you are pro-development, you know. So bring your skills, they are required, bring your expertise is required, bring your in-depth knowledge. I agree to that. But somewhere, somehow, maybe because we've been too spoiled depending on government, but okay, let's agree that government must drive this process because it is the one that brings investment in the country. Yeah, you know, it sort of puts my mind into an octopus view, and I'm trying to get what all these tentacles are saying to one another. Mara, at the end of the day, in appreciating what has been presented to us, I see an opportunity for host communities to also come to party in a responsible way, not just in a way where they easily allow themselves to be used by any other party that is rising out of sinister agendas, so to say. And again, training for Mahosi is required, because they are the weakest link. You know, they really are. These people are thinking beyond this little 15,000 rands they get of salary from government. They want to make more money. Everybody wants to be like, example, the Khosia Royal Bafokeng, for instance. But in doing so, it is at the expense of communities falling apart, you know, and a lot just happens there. So I am keen to read through the rest of the presentation once it's shared, because I'd love to do some interviews with the esteemed colleagues. I'm on radio. It's a community radio station, and these are issues I'm really quite passionate about. If I wasn't scrolling through the WhatsApp status of Mayor Sheila Huma, I wouldn't have seen this poster, so I immediately participated. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you are raising very important issues of education, but also issues. What we are implying is that what is privilege is at the production level, as far as the life cycle of the mining is concerned. But what about after the mining has closed? So we need also to concentrate on that. Sediko, you want to respond to the comments?
Yeah,
briefly, before we give it to.
Yeah, thanks for the comments, Lesego. And one of the findings in the, because I was just giving a high level of my findings, but I mentioned it about the dysfunctionality of the municipalities, politically and administratively. That also includes the issue of failure to do long-term planning. Some of the plans, the IDP documents, you can see it's just a cut and paste. Also, the latter speaker on the issue of Mahosi, I have indicated about also the internal fight within traditional authorities fuel these conflicts. On the issue that is raised again by Moela, I want to suggest, Moela, that you go and get the court judgment that was delivered in September 2021. It's about at the North Gauteng division between the Chamber of Mines versus the Minister of Mineral. That judgment makes it very clearly that mining charter is not the law. So you can't use that and say the mining charter says the following, because that's not the law. And if something is not the law, you choose whether to comply with it or not. So it's not the law. So there's no law that still forces the mine to engage with communities. There's no such law. And on the issues of the report findings, the report findings answered the central questions, which was what causes the conflict. And these findings are informed by data collected. The data that I collected out of this participant indicated that these are the findings. And none of these participants mentioned the issue of government's lack of monitoring and evaluation processes. I'm talking about the base of this study. There might be a study somewhere that talks about government's lack of monitoring, but for this study, the participants indicated all those as the issues that causes the conflict, and they have never mentioned the issue of monitoring. There's another question about, I would love to clarify in a situation where companies mining on the land that is under land claim, and its municipalities in the process of to hand over the land to the CPA. If the mine is mining on the land that is under land claim, you wait for the outcome of that land claim. And after being declared a landowner, the MPRDA is very clear on the relationship between the landowner and the mining right holder. So until you are declared the landowner, for now, wait for that process. And when now you are the landowner, you go to the MPRDA, which is the law, and it defines how should then the mining right holder and the land owner engage. I know that there should be a compensation to the surface right holder. Landowners are the surface right holders. You don't own the minerals. The minerals are owned by the people of the country, and the custodian is the state. And then the state gives the mining right to mine A or B, to mine. But the state still is the custodians of the mineral on behalf of all the people. So if I'm owning a piece of land here and there is chrome or there is platinum or there is whatever, I don't own that mineral. I've got the surface right, but not the mineral right. But what I'll do also, without a waste of time, I will allow Dr. Breakfast to talk about the center and other questions that are on the chat box. I'll propose that colleagues, if you write questions and you want a follow-up, drop also your email, then we can engage further, or you can follow me on my Facebook page that I'll share the details, then we can have a conversation. But let's now allow Dr. Breakfast to talk about the center, if it's okay with you, Program Director.
Yes, Gilbert, is it okay with you? I see you have got your hand up. I don't want to close you out.
Thank you, Leader. So I've heard the doctor saying there's a law that compel the mining companies to consult with mining affected communities. So I want to state to the doctor that in terms of Section 16 and 22 and 27 of the MPRDA, mining rights and prospecting rights holders are required to consult with landowners, lawful occupiers, and any interested and affected parties. And that's also stipulated in the IPELRA, the Interim Protection of Informal Land Rights Act. So I'm also surprised when the doctor is saying the mine is not compelled to consult with mining communities. And like I mentioned before, so the doctor is saying the mining charter is not the law. Yes, the mining charter is not the law, but the policy that is derived from the MPRDA. And policies that are derived from the MPRDA, they might not be binding, but most mining companies are still practicing them. And I'll tell you one thing, for instance, in my community, we were in a situation where the mining company was negotiating with traditional leaders on behalf of the communities. We went to DMRE, and the regional manager at DMRE made it clear to the traditional leaders that they don't have any right to negotiate on behalf of the community when to come into mineral exploration and mining operations. So I'm surprised. That's what I'm saying. The reports have a lot of gaps. And by the way, I'm Gilbert man. I'm from mining affected communities at the election, working as a media and communication officer. I'm also a graduate in introduction to mining and policy and practice. So I understand these laws. So I'm appealing to the doctor to say, maybe your report was rushed because it has excluded a lot of laws. Your IPLRA, your state land policy, that state that a land belongs to everyone who stays in it, irrespective on how that land is registered in the registered deeds. So the report finding is misguiding. I don't want to lie, it's misguiding because it has left out the laws that protect mining affected communities. Instead, it has focused on municipalities and traditional leaders as legitimate stakeholders, of which is not. It is totally wrong. Mining communities also and inter-external affected parties are also the legitimate stakeholders within the mining sector, and they form part of the consulting process, not only the traditional leaders. Traditional leaders don't have powers, although they have responsibilities over land. They don't have powers to overrule over land. They don't have powers to negotiate on behalf of mining affected communities. That's my stand. I'm begging people with your report, sir.
Right. We should also take into account the questions, and by extension, the topic, the causes of conflict between the mining communities and the mines, with particular focus on Bojanala Platinum District Municipality. And then I do take your points with regard to what you're saying, but I'm also appealing ourselves to take into account the causes as well, because that is what guides the research. When the scope of research can be extended, of course, to include other things, and including the issues that we are raising, Mr. Nguyen, as well. So that's something which is very much important. And then very fortunately, as Professor Breakfast has indicated, the presenter has been accepted into the doctoral study program. Then I suppose that those particular issues are going to be taken care of as well going forward. Thank you very much, colleagues, for participation. And then I would like to give Professor Breakfast some time to make presentation about what they do.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Our center is situated in the Faculty of Humanities at Nelson Mandela University. So the rationale behind the establishment of the center is to basically facilitate, conflict management, in particular at local government level, but our focus is not confined to local government. My view is that South Africa is not a post-conflict society. By contrast, it has a long-standing history of a deep-rooted conflict, along racial lines, along class lines, along tribal lines, and so on. And protracted conflicts, they have a tendency of posing a threat to peace, security, and stability. No wonder we have established this center to basically de-escalate, the magnitude of conflicts in a society. So we are going to develop an early warning system to intercept security threats. We are also intending to contribute constructively to conflict, peace, security, and stability locally and also on a global scale. We do recognize the nexus between security and development, because there's a symbiotic relationship between security and development, because as you know, when we are sleeping, it's the security forces who look after the economy. So you can't talk about development and not talk about security. We are also planning to roll out a number of training programs on conflict, on security, working with different security forces, like the armed forces, SEBs, and so on. And also we want to work with multilateral institutions at the regional level and also on the continent. So to give effect to our mission and objectives, we are going to focus on research, workshops, holding seminars, public lectures, and conferences. Yeah, so we subscribe to what John Benton and Edward Azar call the second track diplomacy, meaning that when there's a conflict, it's the protagonist who must resolve their differences, as opposed to a third party. I mean, I'm sure you might remember when we had a democratization process or a political transition to democracy, there was no third party. We had a series of meetings in the form of CODESA, CODESA 1, CODESA 2. So that is the theory of second track diplomacy by John Benton. Yeah, so as I pointed out earlier on, we want to focus on training programs on mediation, arbitration, negotiations, and also strategic planning. Yeah, I think that's that, Chair. I don't want to bore you with too much information.
Yeah, no, I think, thank you very much, Prof. I think you have highlighted the main critical issues that we are going to be taking into account and the programmatic interventions that are going to be in place in order to address issues of security, peace, and conflict resolution. This is very much important. And to note is the interaction between class, race, and other markers of exclusion in the society that are very much important when dealing with conflict. And then we have highlighted the issue of programs such as which focus on negotiations, arbitration, and mediation. So that's something which is very much important. And then, colleagues, do you want to ask any question or any comment that you would like to make before we close? It goes once, twice, thrice, it is gone. Colleagues, once again, thank you very much for your time. And then I know very well that it is very difficult to attend these sessions given the watertight schedules that we are having, and we really appreciate your time. And then we share this particular information. And then we have shared an email, and then the presenter also highlighted the fact that if you can follow him on a particular website, on Facebook, to access any information or to discuss, to engage in robust debate on a variety of issues that are of national and critical importance. Thank you very much. And then without wasting time, I think the session is adjourned. Everybody have a good evening and enjoy the weekend.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Thank you so much for chairing the meeting.